According to the global warming alarmists, we need to get rid of all CO2 produced by industry and produced in the production of electricity. These same alarmists claim that we can replace that energy through renewable sources such as wind and solar. Of course, the notion is ludicrous. Let's take a look. Hello, everybody. This is Gary Benoit, your host for Beyond the Cover. And today we have with us Ed Hiserodt, who wrote this article in the New American Magazine entitled Stark Raving Green. Ed, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Gary.
Well, we appreciate having you. Now, of course, Ed, you know a lot about the production of electricity and a lot about the distribution of electricity because you've had a power company that you have run for a good number of decades, I think going back to the 1970s, and that is called Controls and Power.
Correct.
So what do you think about this idea of being able to produce electricity from wind and solar? Could that actually power the economy that we have today?
No. I would like to point out that part of this article, or the idea for this article, came from a gentleman who is known as a futurist. His name is Willis Eichenbach. And he had written an article that was in the blog, What's Up With That, called Bright Green Impossibilities. And I'd like to give you what he says about that. He says, they are not just impossible, they are pie in the sky, flying unicorns, bull goose, loony, impossible. I think he's trying to emphasize that it's impossible to do what they're planning to do. And we can kind of go through what they're planning to do.
Okay. Well, first of all, people should realize that a windmill is only going to work if the wind is blowing, and that a solar panel is only going to be able to collect the energy and convert it into electricity if the sun is shining. How much land space would be required, or how many windmills or solar panels would be required to replicate the energy that we're now producing?
Okay, the World Energy Council says that by 2050, we'll need 244 petawatt hours. Now that doesn't mean anything to anybody, I don't think, right now. That would be the total energy consumption. People probably are accustomed to the term kilowatt hours because that's what our electricity is metered in. And our houses average about 1,200 kilowatt hours per year. If we go away from fossil fuels, which is 80% of the power, really more than that, but if we take away from fossil fuels, then we've got like 194 peta hours per year that we have to make up. So how do we make that up? A regular windmill that you see on the side of the road these days is probably around 2 to 3 megawatts. That is reduced by the fact that the winds aren't always blowing. And so we're talking about one of those windmills, and this is a big windmill, it's 200 feet tall. So we're talking about a big machine that puts out one megawatt compared to a nuclear power plant, which puts out 1,000. So you can see there's quite a bit, takes quite a few windmills. And of course, there's times when they're not generating any power when the wind's down. And so that's trouble in River City when that happens.
Right. Well, it would take 1,000 windmills, wouldn't it, to replace a plant producing 1,000 megawatts of electricity?
That's correct. Correct. So we would have to have an additional production capacity of 22 terawatts. Now, How would we do that? We'd have to add 2.2 gigawatts a day for 10,000 days. Every day we have to add 2.2 gigawatts.
And that would be to accomplish the goal that was announced by the Biden administration.
Yes. In the world, it would take clearing 880 square miles every day, or 8.8 million miles during between now and 2050. By comparison, North America is 9.54 million acres. So that's just a monstrous amount of acreage it would take to do the windmills. They take approximately 85 acres of land to keep the windmills from interfering with one another. And that land has to be cleared of trees. It has to be relatively level. And it's very difficult to build these windmills.
Yeah. So if you put the windmills too close together, that would be counterproductive.
Yes. The fact is they tear each other up when you do that. There's so much turbulence when you do that. The point here is that it would be impossible to do these things in the time we're given. We're given there's 10,000 days between now and 2050 approximately. And so every day we're going to have to build, just for this country alone, 267 wind turbines to be installed every day in the United States. We'd have to do 105 square miles every day of deforestation in preparation for the windmill. And if you've ever seen one of these installations, it's amazing. First they dig a hole that's about 25 feet deep and about 100 feet wide in circumference, in diameter, and then they fill it with concrete, and that's the base of the windmill. This takes it's a big project. A typical windmill installation is about $3.5 million for a 2 megawatt wind machine. The main problem we have here is that people don't understand, that are making the laws and spending the money, don't have any sense of numeracy. They don't understand how much it takes to do the projects that they'd like to do. They just consider them to be magic, but that's not true at all. And we just don't have the capacity in our manufacturing or installation capacity to get anywhere near that amount of windmills up in a day. It just can't be done.
So you're talking about in the millions of windmills.
Yes, absolutely. Each one of them is about a $3.5 million project.
I mean, how would you even be able to do that? Because there are places where you could not put up windmills. You could not have these windmills in the center of New York City, for instance, unless maybe you put several in Central Park. But basically, you're talking about saturating the country with windmills.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and something else said that a lot of people don't think about because they imagine that the electricity is created and that's that. But that's really not the case. You create the electricity, and then you have to either use it when you produce it or generate it, or you have to store it.
Yes, and we don't have any way to store it.
Well, how about batteries?
That's a very poor, expensive way to do it. Yeah, we think about batteries to go in our laptops and that sort of thing, but these batteries, there was a project in Australia where they had 429 megawatt batteries. In other words, a megawatt hour batteries. And Tesla did this, or Elon did it, really. He did it for $50 million. Now this wouldn't run the grid at all, but it was there to smooth out some of the peaks and valleys. There's no existing uh, battery storage facility that it would store the power off like a nuclear power plant. It just they just don't exist.
So this is why we might as well be talking about flying unicorns when we're talking about trying to replace the energy that we now have with windmills. And of course, really the same applies to solar panels. Not only does the sun have to shine for a solar panel to work, and that's not the case 24 hours a day, obviously, but there's only so much energy from the sun that hits a particular amount of space on the earth, such as a square yard or a square meter.
That's true. And it's only, you can only figure on 16.5% or so of the energy from the sun that you're actually intercepting.
It is impractical, but in fact, it's worse than impractical. It's something that could not be done if we're talking about replacing all the energy. But let's talk about a nuclear power plant. What would be the benefit of a nuclear power plant?
Well, for one thing, it's reliable. Its power is what's called dispatchable power. In other words, when somebody needs the power, they can get it. A nuclear plant typically is up over 95%. The rest of it is refueling. It has no emissions, so there's no carbon dioxide emissions.
Right. Well, there's literally no smokestack, and of course you mentioned carbon dioxide, and actually that's a natural gas, and it's really something that's needed for life. But the climate extremists look upon CO2 as this evil gas.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they support nuclear power?
Well, they think of some of them do support nuclear power for the fact that it is CO2 free. Mm-hmm. But there's many other reasons. For one thing, the amount of fuel it takes for a coal-fired plant, a 1,000 megawatt coal-fired plant, is 100-ton carloads, railroad carloads of coal per day.
Right.
And whereas the nuclear plant is like one truckload of fuel per year. It's you don't have to get your coal all stacked up in the coal yard and have it freeze due to freezing rain. You can't dig the coal out of it. And gas lines can rupture, but nuclear plant is self-contained. All you need to do is that small amount of fuel every.
Right. Well, like you say, a small amount of fuel, but then there is nuclear waste, but there's also a small amount of waste because you're using a small amount of fuel to begin with. But so often you hear with regard to nuclear power, Ed, the danger of radiation. And before I ask you about that, I do want to introduce your book here, Underexposed: What If Radiation is Actually Good for You? So I'd like you to say a little bit about this, because that title throws a lot of people. Radiation good for you? How can that be? And also, how much radiation do you get from a nuclear power plant? And based on what you're saying on the title of this book, Ed, would you like to live next to a nuclear power plant?
Oh, absolutely. I want it to be emitting a lot more than it does. It only puts out about 5 millirems per year at the most at the boundary, and you can easily go to 10,000 millirems without harm to yourself. That's all changing right now. The strict rules about radiation are going out the window because it's been found. One of the places was the Japanese bomb test. Weren't exactly tests. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they knew where all the people were, so they could calculate to pretty good precision what radiation they got. And they found that the people that got a modest amount of radiation outlived their unexposed peers. And that was one of the things that showed that radiation was beneficial.
Right. Now, obviously, you're not talking about ground zero, but a certain distance from the blast where they got a
Right.
certain amount of radiation that was beneficial as opposed to harmful.
That's the
You know,
case.
I'd like to draw an analogy, Ed, and see what you think of this. And I know we're going to be talking now about a different kind of radiation, because what we're saying, I'm sure will sound counterintuitive to a lot of our viewers. But let's talk about sunlight for a moment. I think everybody realizes that if you were to grow up in a cave and never leave that cave, never go outside, never see the light of day, that would be unhealthy because you need a certain amount of sunlight. On the other hand, if you were to spend 24 hours a day under the hot sun, that would not be so good. Is that a fair comparison to the radiation that you're talking about?
Yes, that's true. It's a it's a phenomenon we call hormesis, and that is your body needs a lot of, like, it needs arsenic, except if you have too much arsenic, it kills you. Even vitamin A can be fatal if you have too much vitamin A.
Right.
Sunshine can, water can, salt, and just practically all elements have hormesis effects. In other words, a small amount is necessary for life, too much is fatal. So we always have to be operating in that range where it's optimum.
Right. And of course, your book, Ed, Underexposed, explains that brilliantly. But one more question I want to ask you has to do with Chernobyl, because the Chernobyl nuclear power plant has been very much back in the news as a result of the war in Ukraine. And supposedly that was this huge environmental disaster. And people did die at Chernobyl, but did they die from radiation? And also, we were told that area would have to be uninhabited, I believe, for many generations. What can you tell us about Chernobyl?
Well, for one thing, the 31 firemen were killed trying to put the fire out. Now, somebody has recently told me that that was really 55 people, but the accepted value is like 31 firemen that were killed. There's a graph in the book that shows the amount of radiation a person would get if they had stayed at Chernobyl the whole time. And it compares that with other places on the earth with natural radioactivity that are many times more than Chernobyl was. The sending of the people out of their homes, that was the tragedy. That was what was killing people. They were suicides and just being thrown out into the world. It was tragic for a lot of.
Well, we appreciate it, Ed, and appreciate the many articles that you've done about energy and the environment over the years. Is there anything you'd like to add as to what the American people can do to try to restore sanity to our energy policies once again? For instance, would you recommend getting the government out of energy policy?
Oh, yeah. It would be nice to get rid of leftists that are in control of it, too. There's quite a bit of interest in what's called a small modular reactor, where you could, instead of having large gigawatt power plants, that you could have two or 300 megawatt plants scattered around where the power is actually needed. That's moving, except it's always being slowed down by the bureaucrats that end up being anti-nuclear, even though they're on, like, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They end up being beginners. But that's the wave of the future, I believe.
Well, and we're going to be asking you to write about that in a future issue of the magazine.
Well, I'm kind of working on it already.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you, Gary. Nice talking to you.
Okay, nice talking to you. And of course, for our viewers, if you'd like to see Ed Hiserot's article that's available in the May 30 issue of the New American Magazine, please click on the link in the description to this video.